would like to bring up President Brown for his comments, but I would also like to recognize that as we open the discussion, we have another special guest in the audience. Dr. Young from the College of Education has been so kind as to bring Dr. Carroll, who was a student of W.E.B. Du Bois, who is 95 years old, and here she will be introduced later, but I wanted to make sure that we had a full picture of who was in the room.
Good afternoon. I am very pleased in more ways than you can currently imagine that this year-long study is taking place. I'm also a graduate of the University of Massachusetts-Amherst. My undergraduate degree is from there in English and American Studies, and my graduate degree in education. But let me take it a little bit further. In 1968, there were a precious few African-American students at UMass-Amherst. A few of us banded together fairly solidly because the way that we found the university was not going to allow us to live the lives that we had planned. And our conclusion was that the university had to change in some significant and major ways in order for us to achieve what it was we set out to achieve. So we wrote a little document called the Black Manifesto, which called for the establishment of the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of African American Studies, later changed to Afro-American Studies. We had, each of us, spent a great deal of time reading a number of Du Bois's works. We knew that his home, Great Barrington, was not far away. The university was preparing to build a new library. There was a small group of African-American faculty who had enabled part of the administration to get some glimpse into the future of America and the world. And quite frankly, part of the foil they used to cause the university to begin to respond was a statement by Michael Thelwell to the administration. Michael Thelwell was on the faculty. Michael Thelwell, by the way, is a Jamaican who at one time was Stokely Carmichael's right hand, was a community organizer in Mississippi, etc. And he said to the Chancellor, you really must listen to me because I have a bunch of crazy and partially educated Negroes who are in the student body, and they have plans that I'm sure you won't like in the way that they plan on playing them out. And he was pretty close to correct. So the Black Manifesto was the document that began the process that established the department. We later went on and connected with the other 4 colleges in that area to establish the 5-college consortium for Afro-American Studies. Smith College, Mount Holyoke College, Hampshire College, and of course ourselves. So that's part of my history, and during my time there, they built what was at that time the tallest library in the world and named it the W.E.B. Du Bois Library. Now, absolutely. Now, part of what I want to make sure that our students gather from this year-long study is some better sense of how history plays itself out through individual lives, so that everything you do today and tomorrow, every thought you think today and tomorrow, every commitment that you make today and tomorrow begins to have an impact on what happens in the world. So in my study of Du Bois and banding with that small group and establishing the Department of Afro-American Studies, of course we came to know in that reading about Atlanta University. It was very prominent. I'd never seen Atlanta University, to my knowledge, although I grew up in Macon, Georgia, and we came to Atlanta frequently. I don't remember Atlanta University. The push then and now was Morehouse College and Spelman College. But I did become aware that Du Bois's most prolific time periods in both writing and activism were during his two tours of duty at Atlanta University. Souls of Black Folk, The World in Africa, all of his major works were right here. And so that was certainly not lost on me. So there was a small clause at the bottom of the last page of the final documents to establish the Department of Afro-American Studies. And that clause suggested that at a point in the future, that this program ought to move forward to establish a PhD program in Afro-American Studies. So here's a crazy, very principled undergraduate pushing a lot of envelopes, crossing new territory, and it creates a situation that eventually produces a Dr. Stephanie Evans. We're both here in the former location of Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University, carrying forward this work. So this is how history really takes place. We had on that faculty, once the department was established, a very unique set of people. We had, of course, I mentioned Michael Thelwell, later joined by John Bracey, Shirley Graham Du Bois, when it was time to put the papers in place, was with us for 2 years, walking the campus in her perpetual red boots. That's what she did. She walked the campus in her red boots. We got to spend time as juniors and seniors with her in the library, looking at documents, sitting and talking sometimes for hours on end. She arranged for a couple of us to go to Yale a couple of hours down the street because Arna Bontemps was about to open the boxes that contained the documents of Langston Hughes's papers. Right. We spent 3 days with him in the bottom of that library, unpacking and talking. They actually had Yale students bringing us food because we weren't going anywhere. We were staying right there. So these are some of the kinds of experiences that begin to help you understand what your roles are in the future. And for us, W.E.B. Du Bois' attraction was the fearlessness of his scholarship, his capacity to change when new information came about. Now, let me clarify that. That didn't mean he yielded easily. He never yielded easily.
All right.
He would fight anyone on anything, anywhere, anytime, for any reason that he chose or deemed appropriate, or sometimes just to get something going. But his scholarship shows change in perspective over time. And I want to share one piece of that with you. All of us are familiar with his perpetual debates with Booker T. Washington. But later, this is part of his 1930 commencement address at Howard University. He took the theme that Negro colleges had failed. And this is part of his statement that day. He says, the method of the modern college has been proven by 100 centuries of human experience. I shared this also with the faculty and staff at the opening workshop this semester. The imparting by the knowledge of the old to the young, the instilling of the conclusions of experience line upon line, precept upon precept. But of course, with this general and theoretical method must go a definite and detailed object suited to the present age, the present group, the present set of problems. It is not then in its methods, but in its practical objects that the Negro College has failed. It is handing on knowledge and experience, but what knowledge and to what end? Are we to stick to the old habit of wasting time on Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and eschatology. And you remember part of his point against Booker T. Washington was we need the liberal disciplines to build men and women who can take their place in modern democratic society. Now listen to what he's saying. Or are we to remember that after all, the object of the Negro College is to place in American life a black man, I'll add, or woman, who can do what the world wants done? Sounds distinctly Booker T-ish, doesn't it? But it's Du Bois. So as you read on, he says, who can help the world know what it ought to want done, and thus by doing the world's work well, may invent better work for a better world. So this is his 1930s view of the same dilemma. So it's perpetually open to change. And one of the things that I think is very, very important to understand about his work, and that I think is so very well exemplified in the Souls of Black Folk especially. And J. Saunders Redding at one point provided some great contextualization for that collection of essays. He said, the book may be seen as fixing that moment in history when the American Negro began to reject the idea of the world's belonging to white people only, and to think of himself in concert as a potential force in the organization of society. He marks this as a distinct turning point. And now you might think that coming from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where for most of his life he was the one and only, that he might not have an appreciation. But as he grew, and I want to just show you, Julius Lester was also part of that faculty. These are my second copies of his 2-volume work, The Seventh Son. They're my second copies because my first copies have to be held together with other materials. I've read them so often, and I've got, every time I read, I put notes in them. So I can't just exchange them, but these are the ones that I work with now because I keep the others in a sealed box. Now, some of my notes, at some point, someone may decide to write about me, and I have some very juvenile notes in there from my junior year in college, and hopefully some more sophisticated notes that came later. But among the things that I gathered from reading The Souls of Black Folk, and I think Lester put it well in 2 points. It's not a historic artifact. The Souls of Black Folk is living and breathing, and if you read it carefully, it speaks to every issue, every dilemma that we face today. Among the statements in the document, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And oh, was it ever, around the planet. And in his essay on progress, this is where you begin to grasp his real view of humanity, where he bestows dignity upon every human being, that he sees all of their possibilities, and in the least of persons, he places great dignity. And I go to that part of the essay after he had been at Fisk and had worked out in the literal sticks, trying to educate people who had no education, who had no means, and dealing with all the difficulties of extreme poverty, rural life, total lack of education, health disparities. He returned to Fisk 10 years later. And he said, he describes it as the 10 years that follow youth, the years when first the realization comes that life is leading somewhere. These were the years that passed after I left my little school. When they were passed, I came by chance one more to the walls of Fisk University, to the halls of the Chapel of Melody. As I lingered there in the joy and pain of meeting old school friends, there swept over me a sudden longing to pass again beyond the blue horizon. My log schoolhouse was gone when he went back to that place, he says. In its place stood progress. And progress I understand is necessarily ugly. The crazy foundation stones that mark the former site of my poor little cabin were still there, and not far away on 6 weary boulders perched a jaunty board house, perhaps 20 by 30 feet, with 3 windows and a door that locked. This was a brand new experience for him. Some of the window glass was broken, and part of an old iron stove lay mournfully under the house. The blackboard had grown by about 2 feet, and the seats were still without backs. The county owns the lot now, I hear, and every year there is a session of school. As I sat by the spring and looked on the old and the new, I felt glad, very glad. And yet, that's where he ends that part. And yet, the despair that was there. But then, if you look at his perceptions of people as he moves through his life, he's talking in the next essay about the South and the sense of depression. And he says, a restless feeling of depression falls slowly upon us. They're riding in a carriage through the countryside. Despite the gaudy sunshine and the green cotton fields, this thing is the Cotton Kingdom, the shadow of a marvelous dream. And where is the king? Perhaps this is he, the sweating plowman tilling his 80 acres with 2 lean mules and fighting a hard battle with death. So we sit musing until, as we turn a corner on the sandy road, there comes a fairer scene suddenly to view. A nearby cottage, snugly ensconced by the road, and nearby a little store. A tall, bronzed man rises from the porch as we hail him and comes out to our carriage. He is 6 feet in height, and here's the line I want you to hear. With a sober face that smiles gravely, he walks too straight to be a tenant. Yes, he owns 240 acres. The land is run down since the boom days. So look at how he defines your stature in life and what you have experienced. He stands too straight to be a tenant. And in the Old South, being a tenant meant back-breaking work, kin can't, sun up till way past sundown, and when all was said and done, you literally had to stay there because you still owed the owner for your means of existence. So this is how he looks and assigns dignity to people in every setting. Through his life, he was among the first to see the deep connection between the history and culture of Africa and the people of African descent throughout the world, and to laud that connection and to honor that culture. Where he began to, I think, gain himself as a black man was when he began to understand his own duality. And he describes in this book several scenes where he begins to come to understand who these people are. On the coast of Massachusetts, down near the Cape, where blacks used to gather, and some of them eventually ended up at Martha's Vineyard, which is still a significant black hangout. The annual picnic at Rocky Point on Narragansett Bay, where the colored people of 3 states were wont to assemble. I viewed with astonishment 10,000 Negroes of every hue and bearing, saw in open-mouthed astonishment the whole gorgeous gamut of the American Negro world, the swaggering men, the beautiful girls, the gaiety and laughter, the unhampered self-expression. I was astonished and inspired. I apparently noted nothing of poverty and degradation, looking at the souls of the people in front of me, but only extraordinary beauty of skin color and utter equality of stance, with absence, so far as I could see, of even the shadow of the line of race. And he says it was about this time that he heard the first African-American music, the Jubilee Singers, the Hampton Quartet, and he said he was thrilled and moved to tears and seemed to recognize something inherently and deeply my own. So as he enters this world and begins to define himself, he defines himself in terms of the globality of the black experience and the dignity of that experience. And as that has characterized his work over time, we come to the last point that I want to make about his work and about the soul of W.B. Du Bois from his address at Peking University on his 91st birthday, 1959. I always like to put myself in historical context. 1959, I was 11. But here he was at Peking University at the end of this amazing life. And just his opening statement, I speak with no authority, no assumption of age or rank. I hold no position. I have no wealth. One thing alone I own, and that is my own soul. Ownership that I have even while in my own country for nearly a century, I have been nothing but a nigger. On this basis, and this alone, I dare to speak, I dare to advise. So, W.B. Du Bois.